4 days until the big debate at UConn. Right now on Face the State, Stefanowski versus Lamont versus Griebel in the race to be your next governor. What can we expect, and how is the campaign going so far? Republican analyst Jody Latina and Democratic analyst Arunan Arulampalam are here with fresh insight. Also a new dynamic in local races, a plethora of gay candidates running for office. We'll talk with two of them now making national news, Mary Fay and A.J. Kerouac. Our flashback. Long before it was legal, Channel 3 covered a gay wedding 44 years ago as we reported on the growing gay rights movement. It's all straight ahead this Sunday morning, September 23rd, 2018.
From Eyewitness News, Connecticut's most watched local political program, this is Face the State.
It's 8:30 and a good Sunday morning to you. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dennis House and welcome to Face the State. 44 days until Election Day when you will choose a new governor. The two major party candidates have been debating, so who is ahead? Joining us today to talk about this is Republican analyst Jody Latina. She's an aide to New Britain Mayor Aaron Stewart and also a former aide to one-time Senate candidate Linda McMahon. Arunan Arulampalam is a former candidate for treasurer. He is also a Democrat, and we thank you two so much for being with us here. And Jody, I'll begin with you. Who is ahead right now in the race for governor, in your judgment?
I think that it is pretty even because we've only had a few debates where the two have gone head to head. I think in this last debate, you saw Bob Stefanowski really kind of come out and come onto his own, very relaxed. He was joking, made a lot of really good points, and I think that he's really garnering some attention from the folks that are undecided in which way they want to go.
Arunan, do you agree, or do you have a different thought on that?
I agree that it's a tight race. I think it'll continue to be a tight race. I think it's going to be about both these candidates' visions for the state. And I think Ned Lamont's going to talk about his background as a businessman and somebody who's created jobs in the state, somebody who's recruited companies to this state. And I think he's going to talk about his vision to provide real property tax relief to hardworking Connecticut families across the state. And his plan to move Connecticut forward.
In the last debate, Dan Malloy was mentioned a lot, and he probably will be in the upcoming debate as well this Wednesday at UConn. How, if you're a Republican, do you think he's doing a good job, Stefanowski, of linking Dan Malloy to Ned Lamont?
I think it's a no-brainer. I think the last 8 years have been very difficult for folks living in our state. Everyone's feeling very overtaxed. You see a lot of people leaving because they can't afford to stay here. And I think what Bob Stefanowski is able to do is talk about some concrete things. He wants to phase in over 8 years the income tax coming down and off of the rolls to give people relief. In the first 4 years, he's really laid out a lot of, maybe common sense things, but things that need to get done. Talking about 5% across the board cuts on all agencies, looking at all agencies doing zero-based budgeting. It sounds very easy. It's a very difficult thing to do because state mentality is, we've got the money, let's spend it. And that's not always the best way.
Ned Lamont was a one-time opponent of Dan Malloy, but he has to walk a very careful line here because he can't be totally critical of him, yet he has to say that I do represent change. And how does he do that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not a political operative, so I think that the discussion about Dan and how he walks around that is maybe a little outside of my pay grade. But I think generally, as a voter, as a resident in the state, I think that one of the things people don't like about this political system is we come to a conversation and talk about two gubernatorial candidates and end up with one side savaging Malloy and one side savaging Trump, and we call it a day and go home. I think we should talk about what the plans are. And with the income tax, I think that's what the only plan that I've seen from Stefanowski is to drive a $10 billion hole through our budget. And we've got a $2 billion structural deficit right now, annually. Putting on $10 billion every year on top of that, I don't think there's anybody paying attention to what's going on in Hartford who thinks that that's sustainable and that's real. And look, I don't work for a city, I don't run a city, and I'm just a taxpayer and a dad, but you do, and you know this better than I do. But what does that do for hardworking families in New Britain? And you look at the numbers in New Britain. The average home in New Britain, average homeowner, is going to pay $6,000 more annually under Stefanowski's plan. And Lamont's providing real tax relief, $1,000 in tax relief for your average homeowner. These are people who are struggling to put families through college, struggling to make their mortgage payments.
I'm not exactly sure where you're getting your numbers from, but what I can say is when you do lessen the income tax burden, that puts more money into the pockets of the people so that they can afford to live in their homes. They can afford to send their kids to school. I don't think that it is just driving a hole in a budget. I think it's about smart budgeting. I think it's about lean and efficiency. And I think it's about really making people work and be held accountable for what they do. These are taxpayer dollars. And up until now, people have been playing games with them, and it's about to stop.
It's not a tax cut when you shift the burden from income tax to property tax owners. You know, it's just putting the burden in a different place and it's putting it on working families.
There are some concrete ways in which he lays out that he will pay for those things, and I think that I agree with you.
I'd love to see them.
More over the next 8 weeks, they need to both be defining exactly how they're going to get there. I would love a $300 property tax relief that Mr. Lamont is explaining for folks. How does he get there? I think to taxpayers, they both have to really dig deep and show their plans and show how it is going to work, because I think that is what everyone's going to base their vote on.
The race will have a new dynamic this week. Oz Griebel, the unaffiliated candidate, former Republican candidate who ran for governor in 2010, is going to be included in the Yukon debate. Who does he hurt the most? Ned Lamont, who does he take votes from? Or Bob Stefanowski? And I'll begin with you, Arun.
Oz is a really good guy, and I think working hard out there. I think that he is probably in the middle of the two candidates, but I think that he probably hurts Stefanowski the most because there are a lot of Republicans in this state.
Is he a factor at all?
I have Republicans in my family who have really sensible views on a lot of issues. And I think that when they look at Stefanowski and they look at another guy who's a conservative who's got sensible views on a number of issues, I think he's going to hurt Republicans because he's going to take away that portion of the electorate that doesn't want to vote for Bob Stefanowski.
Jody?
I actually would like to see Mr. Stefanowski somehow broker a deal with Oz Griebel. I do believe that that is a major factor. I think that there are a lot of Republicans who are not comfortable with the way that the race is going. And I think that Oz Griebel is an option, and you don't want to do that if you want to get that seat. If you want to maintain a Republican leader in the governor's office, you cannot take that vote. So I would like to see the two of them broker a deal. Become a team somehow. Let Oz be part of this moving forward and changing the direction of our state.
Why are Republicans uncomfortable with the direction of the race, you just said?
I think that some insiders are feeling a bait and switch. I feel a lot of folks are talking about maybe the fact that Stefanowski wasn't prepared so much with the money, which seems to now be in place, but for a while there it was looking a little sketchy. And I think that folks were very nervous and concerned because they weren't necessarily feeling the love. A lot of these folks like to have some say in what is going on and how the race is actually going to be done and how the campaign may move forward, and they weren't feeling the love.
Taxes are certainly the big issue, and there are some brutal ads out there on both sides of the fence, but one attacks Ned Lamont, saying that he will tax pretty much everything. How does he deal with that when he goes door to door and people say, I don't want any more taxes? And he says, well, I may have to raise taxes.
Well, you know, it's a kitchen table issue. I think you deal with it by talking about people's finances, sitting there and talking to working families about what their finances look like under a Stefanowski plan and under a Lamont plan. I think he's really trying to provide tax relief where it matters to working families who get hit the hardest by the tax structure in the state that's so reliant on property taxes. It hits the people who are struggling the hardest to make their payments. And I think Lamont's got to talk about those.
You know, we talk about taxes, and car tax is one of the big things. As I've been around the state this past week, people have been complaining about that most of all. And former Governor Jody Rell, when she was in office, had called for the elimination of this car tax because in one town you might pay $200 and next town over you might pay $600 for the exact same car. Yet Republicans aren't talking about that this year. Should they be?
It's capped at this point, so it is up to the local municipality whether they want to go up to that cap. I think that what is more concerning is the fact that Mr. Lamont talked about a statewide car tax or property tax. And I think that that is very concerning to people because how much more can you take? I think that talking about reversing taxes and eliminating some of the burdens that people have is probably more prudent at this point in the campaign. I think they both need to be concentrating on that.
I want to talk a little bit about voter enthusiasm. What are you seeing out there, Ronan? Are people excited to vote this year? Are they following the race?
I think that there's excitement from unconventional places. You know, I think that there's a lot of really great candidates running for state rep, for state senate, who 2 years ago, 4 years ago, on our side of the aisle at least, might not have thought about running A lot of women running for the first time who are really qualified out in places like Avon and Fairfield and all New Hartford and places you wouldn't expect that I think are making seats competitive where they weren't before. And I think that's what I'm most excited about.
It was a five-way Republican race. Bob Stefanowski got about 30%. Four others got more, and they all lost. How do you unite the party, and are Republicans excited?
I think Republicans need to be more excited. I think that we have a long way to go. I think people need to coalesce. They need to think about the end game, and if that is to have Republican values in the office of the governor, then we all need to get together.
You know, a lot of people say that this could be a Republican year because you're replacing a Democratic governor who is unpopular. How do you convince Democrats that, yes, let's go with the Democrats one more time?
Well, I think you lay out the plans. We talk about specifics and don't get dragged into the cycle of making about personalities and people who aren't running. You know, you talk about what it's like for families across the state. And you talk about what a $10 billion deficit looks like in our state. And those have effects that reverberate far outside the Capitol, that reverberate in average families. You know, when families of veterans in this state, when the state can't afford to pay for Valor Guard at their funerals, when the state can't afford daycare for kids whose moms need to go to work, the kids who we hope will have a brighter future. When the state can't afford to subsidize the tuitions at our state universities, and families that are sending their kids to public state universities are working hard, see a big tuition increase. That's going to have real effects on families across the state, and I think that's the message we should be talking about.
This coming Thursday, we have a debate among the lieutenant governor candidates. I know you worked for lieutenant governor candidate Aaron Stewart, who ended up losing. Joe Markley is now the candidate. Does he help or hurt Bob Stefanowski?
I worked for Joe Markley as well when I had done press work in the Senate, and Joe is a very thoughtful person. He's a smart man. I think that some of his views may not align with all of Republicans, but again, you have to look at this as a team. And if you feel like Bob is showing good leadership, then Joe will fall in line with Bob. I think it's a team effort.
What about Susan Bysiewicz?
I think Susan Bysiewicz has experience in the legislature. I think she's beloved in a lot of parts of the state, in eastern Connecticut and western Connecticut. From getting out around the state, I could see it.
She's won statewide races before.
She's won statewide races before. And look, I think you put the two candidates up against each other. You look at Markley's priorities and look at Susan's priorities on health care, on sexual assault. I mean, Markley's been on the far fringes of almost every vote that's come through the state Senate.
We thank you very much, both of you, for being here today. Jody Latina, Arun Arulampalam. And you said you're not a political operative, but once you come on Face the State, you officially are one. So you've been christened one. So good to have you here, and we'll have you on again. And just a reminder, this Wednesday is our big Republican-Democratic unaffiliated debate with Ned Lamont, Bob Stefanowski, and Oz Griebel. It will be broadcast live on Channel 3 and all of our platforms, the digital platforms. It'll be live at 7 o'clock at the Jorgensen Theater in Yukon. I will be moderating. The panelists are Emily Munson of Hearst Media and Christopher Hanna from the Daily Campus, the Yukon newspaper. Then the following day at 7 o'clock on WFSB.com and our Facebook page, we'll have the Lieutenant Governor debate. We were just talking about Susan Bysiewicz, the Democrat, Joe Markley, the Republican, and Monty Frank, the unaffiliated candidate. They will debate right here in our Face the State studios, and it will be broadcast at 7 o'clock that night. When we come back, is it the year of the gay candidate in Connecticut? We'll take a look, and we'll talk with two local candidates, and we'll have our flashback. And I invite you to watch past interviews of Face the State on our website, our app, WFSB app, and on our YouTube channel.